Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this discussion today on the second day. I will talk a little bit about what I'm doing. My name is Frank Schlichting from Solarlock in Germany. We are a monitoring company. We do a lot of different things, not only the monitoring of PV plants, we are also very active in feed-in management, which is a big issue, especially when you think about the distribution grids and the number of PV plants that will be installed in a couple of months and years, also here in India. We have started actually in 2007, that's almost 10 years ago, in Winsdorf, which is south of Stuttgart in Germany. In the meantime, in this short time frame of just 10 years, we have installed more than 258,000 different installations for the monitoring. We are present right now in more than 96 countries in the world. Our owner since September 2015 now is a big Swiss utility company, BKW, which gives us also leverage on the other forms of renewable energies like wind energy. But right now I want to talk about solar only and rooftop solar in particular. We have some international activities also in Bethel, Connecticut, near New York. We are present in India. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, we have a presence since September last year in Shanghai in China, and also sales office in Poland. In addition to that, we have distribution channels and also sales offices in more than 50 countries in the world. We are committed to provide quality. The reason is very simple. What we are doing is monitoring. And if we want to provide the best quality of monitoring services, we have to subject ourselves also to quality investigations and certifications, and we have done that, of course. So as I already mentioned, we are present in 96 countries in the world. So virtually you will find some really nice locations. Even at Antarctica, you have a monitoring service. We have some installations in Spain, in office buildings, also in Paris for commercial buildings. We have also standalone ground-based monitoring for bigger plants like this one in Poland. One of the biggest privately owned shopping malls is monitored by our services. This is in Beirut, a shopping mall. We also have some in South Africa. Also small plants like this one in South Africa, we do monitoring for. We are monitoring mosques. We are also monitoring the Vatican in Rome, so we are agnostic to religion. We can do this only by innovating. We started very simple with just visualizing what we can see on the production side. But we also came across a little bit of difficulties in growing in Germany. In 2011, we were in a similar situation as you are now here in India. There are a lot of installations in a very short time. Distribution grids can't grow, so we have to overcome feed-in issues. If you have a restricted feed-in, you still want to use your PV-generated power. How do you do that? You, first of all, have your self-consumption. In the beginning in Germany, it was very similar to India. It was an investment. You want to earn money with your PV plant by feeding it in. The second step then was, I can use my power for myself. So self-consumption is a big issue for industrial and commercial buildings also. But we started at the residential, at very small plants in the beginning. Now we are extending up to 5 megawatt plants. We also have some bigger ones, but this is the region where we feel comfortable for the monitoring. I'll give you some reference customers that we gained last year. Also some big names like IKEA is monitoring with our monitoring service, but also some other big brand names that you probably know. Also United Nations is using the Solarlock device. Let's talk a little bit about the Solarlock India. We have been present in India since 2013, which is a long time right now, although we just set up office last year, in February last year. The team we have in India is based out of Mumbai. Nitin, maybe you can stand up very briefly. Many of you know Nitin, of course. He's our country manager for the Indian operation. And since October last year, we also have 4 other gentlemen, that is 3 other gentlemen. The oldest member of the Indian family is Shivendra, who's based here in Delhi since 2013, so a long time ago. During the last year, we have achieved remarkable results. We started in February. We trained customers in March and April, 60, 50, another 100 in November. We already received a lot of recognition in India. Thank you very much for appreciating our work that we are doing. And we are also extending to large areas in India with 1,500 loggers installed. That's 1,500 installations that we are monitoring in India alone. Here are some customer names, including Tata, for example, Delta. It's just a small selection that we're doing. So, why is India important also for us? India is one of the biggest growth markets at the moment for PV. We have some focal markets, India, China, and the US. We are growing out of Germany, and we are trying to bring in our experience that we have gained the last 10 years. Also the difficult parts. I heard a lot about yesterday about the net metering, some organizational things, some time delays, some intransparencies. That's all normal. We all have that in Germany as well and still have it to some extent. But I think there's a big potential to grow for renewable energies here in India, and this is why we also set our focus on India. In the rooftop sector, we already achieved a 50% market share here for monitoring, so there is a certain awareness for monitoring already. Although I know in the beginning, people might ask, what do you need monitoring for? This is additional cost. It's not very high cost, but it's additional cost. So we are very cost sensitive. I'm aware of that here in India. So let's just do the installation, and the PV plant will work for the next 20 years without any problems. I wish it were so. It isn't, and I'll show you some numbers later on. So what can we provide? We can provide assistance in different areas. It can be the monitoring, it can be the feed-in, it can be also the energy management, and we can provide these services to a lot of different groups, to installers, of course to plant owners, also to end customers, and also to EPCs and investors. We are also talking to banks and insurance companies. I learned yesterday that one of the issues you have is finding finance. A bank is willing to finance when they can control the risk. The risk of a PV plant is the amount of power that's being generated. And you have to monitor this very carefully. If you don't monitoring, you're not preventing your investment from going down in the yield. One of the benefits that we provide also is that we are manufacturer independent. So all the names you see on this presentation slide, they are manufacturers of inverters. They are also solution partners provided, and we are in contact with all the different manufacturers in order to be able to have one unique monitoring system, and it doesn't matter what kind of equipment you have installed, which makes life easier for installers, of course, because they are much more flexible in what kind of equipment they can install. If there are some shortages in supply for one supplier, they can use another one, and they just have one combined monitoring solution that they have to look for. We are providing data logging equipment. Also, we have web portals that enable you to on a very high level do professional monitoring. You look after possible errors, mistakes in your PV installations, and you can correct them very quickly. I come to that a little bit later. We also provide equipment, of course, additional accessories like metering, also like heat elements that you can use your power for heating water, for example, which is very commonly used now in Germany and also in Austria. As I already mentioned, we have a range of, let's say, about 10 kilowatts peak or below, up to around about 5 megawatts of installed power. That's our sweet spot where I say we are the right company to work with. So a big variety in the residential, commercial, and industrial environment. The SolarLog web provides you with the data recorded globally, of course. So you always have also on your iPhone or on your other mobile phone, Android phone, you have the data of your PV plant that you want to monitor. So you always know is everything in work correctly as expected. So we have some main functions that we can provide. You can even do remote configuration of your PV plant. So you don't have to go out as an installer, drive a lot of hours, and traffic is an issue also in India. I realized that yesterday when I went through Delhi. So you can save money also by accessing your site remotely. You have access to all the important documents of the plant. So let's say you want to change the plant size and you want to add additional components. You have all the documentation available. You have the reporting functionality, the error reporting, as well as the financial reporting. So it's all a one-stop solution. We realized in Germany that even though there's a monitoring in place, people don't monitor. The reason is very simple. A lot of small installers, they don't have the time to really look at the individual plant daily. They are busy in installing new sites. They are out in the field. They are not sitting in front of a TV monitor, or computer monitor. So what we provide for them is also, this is optional of course, we can conduct the monitoring services to them. We have a operations center in Winsdorf. We will also have one in Asia, preferably in India, and also one in the United States. So we have a global accessibility for all the PV plants, and we can actively monitor the PV plants. We don't have to, but we can. The advantage you have by doing this is our experience. With 258,000 installations, we know a lot about possible mistakes, errors, what can occur, and some constellations that you won't see unless you are really at site. Let's talk a little bit about why monitoring. So the answer is pretty simple to detect plant faults. This is a picture. Obviously, you know what the fault is. It was wind. But there are much more subtle faults that you might not be aware of unless you have detailed information about the performance of your plant. So what I've read recently in some of the magazines, international magazines also, that quality already is an issue in India. There are a lot of reports about warnings about project quality. These are all statements that I got from several reports. So obviously, if you don't take care about the quality, the acceptance of PV will degrade. I learned yesterday that we also have to take into consideration the consumer approach, the feeling about PV and investments. It is an emotional thing also. It's a financial thing in the first line, of course, but I'm doing something good when I do a PV installation and install renewable energy. But if I got the feeling that the quality of such an installation is not worth the money I'm installing it for, then the acceptance level will decrease. So I only can emphasize this one more time. Make sure that you protect the investment of a PV installation. This can only be done when you properly analyze, and not only analyze once in the installation process, but over the time, how the quality of your plant is. So there are many possible sources of errors, like the modules themselves. They can degrade, they can have with a bad installation being stepped on, so you have additional degradation of the modules. The cabling is very crucial. We have seen cables lying in water, corroding, some bad couplings used and plugs used for the cabling. The inverter itself can have a failure. We have detected one particular plant where an inverter was completely shut down for part, was a multi-inverter plant, was completely shut down for several months, which is loss of money. Nobody detected it. Also the AC installations and the grid can contribute to some sources of errors. What are these sources? For modules, for example, you have dirt in grid, you have to clean modules, especially in a heavily polluted environment. You have, of course, shattering effects, you have degradation of the modules over time. For inverters, you have complete breakdowns of inverters, but you also have some inverters only functioning partially with some MPP trackers. Most of the inverters have more than just one MPP tracker. Excuse me. If there's just one of the MPP tracker faulty, it might work to some extent, but not fully. You might also encounter yield problems, especially in connection with bad connectivity or degradation, even some animals that tear up some of the cables, which you are not aware of. So there are a lot of possible error sources, and we can help on identifying the causes of these errors by directly talking to the inverters on a protocol base. We also can provide additional benefits. Benefits like, does it work? Yeah? Oh, yes, the batteries now. Yes, the batteries now. Okay, you can have additional benefits from feed-in management. Right now, it's not a big issue here in India. It wasn't in the beginning in Germany, but in 2012, new regulations popped up, and you had to control the feed-in level of your power. So instantaneously, PV installers were asked to implement a device that can do the feed-in management. And you can do it in several ways. I'll come to that a little bit later. But let's get back to the possible failures of PV plants. You see 3 modules here. One has 80% peak power, the other one 78, which is about the same. You would say they're working nicely. The other one is 60%. If you don't know the difference between the 3 module areas in one PV plant, you would have a degradation of 8%, which is hardly noticeable, because other effects, like weather effects, could have exactly the same lesser amount of energy being produced. So how do you figure out that your PV plant is working nicely? By checking on the individual data that you get from the different areas of your PV installations. If you have just one field, for example, you can check versus a sensor box very easily. But you have a good overview on, is the plant performing as expected or not? So, let's see. Okay. There are many applications where you can use the monitoring for. You can get yield reports, the yield monitoring, that's the simple solution. But you also want to have evaluations of the performance over year. This is important also to financial investors that want to see what's the worth of my investment in 2 years and 3 years time frame. You also can compare your site to reference sites nearby. So how do we perform actually here in comparison to another plant next by? Since we are connected with all the plants, we can provide those numbers as well. There's some other built-in customer support. I already mentioned that you have access to the site remotely and can control what actually might be corrected in terms of installations. You also have reactive power control, which is very important for the utilities. You can set inverters providing reactive power to be fed into the grid. Last thing I want to show you is an analysis that we did recently, end of last year. The question was, what are the main failures of a PV plant that might occur over time? And we have selected a number of devices or plants. Actually, the first step was to select 48 PV plants out of the 258,000. Which are already monitored with solar lock. So there is a monitoring in place, but nobody's doing the monitoring. So we accumulated the accumulated installed volume of these 48 plants was about 4.2 megawatt of power. We used different plant sizes from 3 to 480 kilowatts peak, so very different sizes, all of them rooftop, mainly in the residential and commercial area. So all these plants started operation in 2007. The period we investigated is 36 months, from 2012 to 2014. And you see another important aspect of monitoring, that's the history of data that you have available. So if you start early, you get the setting right, and you know your PV plant is producing accordingly. But how does it develop over time? We are storing all the data. So no data is lost. You have it for 100 years if you like. The plant locations were in Germany. That's for the ease for us to evaluate them, but it could have been anywhere in the world. So there are 4 areas, main areas that we detected for failure. One is the connection. One is connection in terms of DC connection, but also in terms of connection in communication between the inverters, especially in a controlled environment where we also have to do the feed-in management. We have the inverter failures, so actually checking on the availability of the inverters and the amount of power they are producing. We also evaluated the status information that we got from various devices like inverters and other devices that are connected to the PV plant, and the overall performance in comparison to radiation data that we got from sensor boxes and nearby plants. So the interesting fact was, first of all, you have to rule out any natural risk. Natural risk in terms of weather degradation, weather is changing, is different every year. So what is actually the amount of power that you wanted to receive or obtain per year? This is the theoretical forecast that you would obtain in such an area. But if you look at the real data, you see there's a change of yield every year. And if you go and combine the two, you see sometimes your yield, of course, is above what you expected, sometimes below. That's normal. Yes. Yes, thank you. Now you can understand me better. Perfect. So sometimes you have months where you have a much higher yield as the one that you were expecting. Sometimes you have a yield that's much lower than what you have expected. I've picked out some months, for example, the February. You see you have a degradation in terms of, it's not a degradation, it's a yield loss of up to 90% for 1 year. In other years, you have just 12% less than the theoretical expectation that you would like to have. So it's a big variation, and this is because of the weather. It's not because of a failure of the PV plant. So how can you differentiate between weather-related factors and actually fault-related factors in the PV installation? In other months, like the March, you have the opposite picture. You have much more than you actually were expecting to get, but also the variation of the yield is very high, between 3 and 51%. And you also have months where it's more or less zero, or the variation is sometimes less, sometimes more. What we have done then is we have done a case study on 4 of these cases. Different errors popped up with them. Some of them had inverter problems. Some of them had just, one of them had a complete blackout of the inverter. We also had some other string failure, so only partially non-functioning PV plants at that time. And what we did is we did a simulation on the losses. We had calculated the losses on the left-hand side. You see the losses, very different plant sizes. That's why the numbers are very varying from 195 euros to 37,000 euros. The 37,000 euros was a big plant, the 480 kilowatt peak with an inverter failure for 2 months, which nobody realized. So we calculated the losses of energy here and the amount of money you lost in that time, which accumulated to almost 40,000 euros. For the right-hand side, we had simulated what would have been the losses if you had detected the errors at once and corrected within a certain period of time. We took 5 days for correcting those. For some deliveries, it might be too short of a time. For some, it is a too long time. This is just the assumption we made. If you say 10 days, you have to multiply the number that you see on the right-hand side by 2, just to give you some point of reference what we took in consideration. So if we had a monitoring in place and a monitoring properly executed, we would have saved 96% of the costs. Earlier this morning, I was talking about what value can you bring with your system. It's all about money, of course, and this should show you a little bit what it can bring. So the amortization, of course, depends heavily on the cost of the PV plants. If you have a large size plant, it's very easy. You have less than an hour of failure, and you have the investment for a monitoring system, the return of invest done. For smaller plants, of course, it takes longer, but you still have the proof that your PV plant is working as you expected it to work. So I talked about feed-in management earlier. In 2012, we had a big problem in Germany because the distribution grids were not prepared to get all the PV energy from the consumer side into their grid. So the German utilities started to regulate the amount of energy you were supposed to feed in. And they restricted it to a 70% feed-in. So you can do it on two ways, basically, how you restrict the load. In peak hours during midday times, you just cap the amount of energy that's produced. That's not very clever because you have a self-consumption. The self-consumption is the green line that you see at the lower part. So if you just cap, you're losing more energy than you actually have to. If you take in consideration also the self-consumption, you see you can add what you consume. The yellow part is not the feed-in, it's the overall production. You can add what you actually consume yourself on top of what you are supposed to feed into the grid. So it's a much more clever way how to restrict the feed-in power. And we can do that. We can support you on that as well. So I already mentioned that you can create reports, statistics, and all the stuff. If you want to have more information, of course, we have a booth outside, and you can come and we can discuss about what's available and what we can do. We are all day long, we are expanding. We have an engineering team doing the hardware, the software ourselves. So we are adding to our solution every day. So come back and listen about energy management functionality that we provide, including battery storage systems, heat pumps, combined heat and power plants, all the like. This is in addition to just a monitoring solution or a feed-in solution. Okay, I think I talked a lot about things we have done. And I would like to summarize my presentation by answering the question, why professional monitoring? First of all, you want to have a reliable detection of all kinds of problems that could occur on your PV plant. And you want to demonstrate it to your customers when you're an installer on EPC, because then you add value to yourself. You can say, I can prove that I have done a good work in installing plants. And especially in an environment where not all of the plants are of top-notch quality, it is a differentiator between you and maybe another installer who's not able to provide that information. It's very important if you take also in consideration operations and monitoring, actively monitoring for your customer as a service, that you have a simplified interface. So, of course, there are inverter integrated solutions for monitoring. That's clear. But these are different from each and every manufacturer. As long as you are going along with just one manufacturer, it's fine. You can focus on this type of monitoring, and there's no additional work. But assume that you have many different kinds of inverters installed. Then you can benefit from a unique solution that incorporates all of these manufacturers in just one monitoring system. It's more effective. Long-term protection of your PV investment, that should have been the number one in this list, because that's what you are doing. You are investing a lot of money in buying a PV plant, and when you do so, for a car you are doing regular checks, for a car you go to regular inspections. But for your PV plant, people are selling PV plants like, just buy it and you don't have to worry for 20 years. That's wrong. That's totally wrong. So you get independent performance control reports about your plant. You can demonstrate it to financial investors. You can demonstrate it to your customers. You are also contributing to stabilization of the grid when this will be an issue also in India for the feed-in management. And there are many other important issues, but I would invite you and join us at the booth together with Nitin, and we can talk about all these in detail and also talk about your particular problems, which I'm very keen on learning, because then we can improve, then we can develop our system to provide you with a better service, and you can provide it to your customers. Thank you very much.